The day I buried my only daughter, my son-in-law threw me onto the street. He didn't just kick me out of the house I'd shared with them for 3 years. He screamed at me, his face twisted with a kind of rage I'd never seen before. "You're a useless old man, go live in the gutter," he spat, his words hitting me harder than any physical blow. I pleaded with him, my voice cracking with grief and disbelief, but he just laughed and slammed the door in my face. The sound of that lock clicking shut was the sound of my life ending for the second time in a single day. The next morning, a mysterious envelope arrived at his door, and the man who threw me away like trash began a desperate hunt to find me. He just didn't know that the man he was looking for no longer existed. Before we get into how it all fell apart, I just want to say thank you for being here and listening. It means a lot to me. I'd love to know where you're all watching from tonight. Please drop your city or state in the comments, and let me know what time it is where you are. It makes me feel a little less alone knowing we're all connected, sharing this moment. My name is Arthur and I'm 58 years old. I used to think that at my age I'd seen the worst life had to offer. I'd buried my wife Ellen 5 years ago, a loss that carved a permanent, jagged hole in my soul. But losing my Emily, that was a different kind of pain. It was a silent, suffocating agony that defied words. She was my only child, the brilliant, shining center of my world. For 2 long years we had waged war against her cancer together. I was there for every chemo session, my hand holding hers, whispering stories of her childhood to distract her from the poison dripping into her veins. I learned to cook her favorite meals, mashing them into a soft pulp she could swallow when she had no appetite. In the final months, when she was too weak to even hold a book, I sat by her bedside and read to her for hours, my voice a low murmur against the steady beeping of the machines. Her husband Kevin was there too, at least in body. The funeral was a small, quiet affair, just how Emily would have wanted. She was never one for big, showy displays. She found beauty in simplicity. Standing there, beside her polished cherrywood casket, I felt a hollowness so profound it was a physical ache in my chest. I reached out a trembling hand and placed a single pink rose on the lid, her favorite color since she was a little girl. Through the polished sheen, I could almost see her face, finally at peace, finally free from the pain that had consumed her young body. Kevin stood beside me, his face a perfect, unreadable mask of grief. But I had seen the cracks in that mask over the past few months. I saw the impatience in his eyes when Emily needed help getting to the bathroom in the middle of the night. I saw the flicker of sheer annoyance when her mounting medical bills came up in conversation. I had made excuses for him, telling myself it was the stress of it all, the unique horror of watching the woman you love fade away day by day. I was a fool. It was something much, much uglier than stress. After the service, the few of us who were closest to Emily returned to the house. It had been my home for 3 years, ever since a minor heart episode had convinced Emily I couldn't be alone. "Dad, you can't rattle around in that big old house by yourself," she had insisted, her voice already thin and reedy from the initial treatments. "This house is too big for just me and Kevin. Please, Dad. I need you here." How could I have ever refused her? Now that same house was filled with the quiet, suffocating murmur of post-funeral gatherings. Kind-hearted neighbors brought over casseroles and baked hams that no one would touch. Distant relatives I hadn't seen in a decade made awkward small talk, their eyes darting everywhere but at me or Kevin. I moved through it all like a ghost, a machine programmed to nod my head and mumble, "Thank you." By 6 o'clock, the last guest had finally departed, leaving behind a heavy, oppressive silence. I found myself in the kitchen mechanically washing a plate, the warm water a small, mindless comfort on my numb hands. That's when Kevin appeared in the doorway. He didn't make a sound. He just leaned against the frame, his arms crossed over his chest. He had loosened the tie of his black funeral suit, and for the first time, I saw not a grieving husband, but a predator in his stance. "Arthur," he said, his voice completely flat, devoid of any human warmth. "We need to talk." I carefully placed the plate in the drying rack and turned, wiping my hands on a dish towel. "Of course, Kevin. I know this is hard on both of us. Emily would want us to lean on each other." "Cut the crap," he snapped, and the harshness in his voice was so unexpected it made me flinch. "Emily's gone. Things are going to change around here starting right now." A cold, greasy dread began to seep into my bones, a terrifying premonition of what was to come. What do you mean change? He pushed himself off the doorframe and took a deliberate step closer. The mask of the grieving son-in-law was gone. All I saw in his eyes was a cold, simmering contempt. I mean, you can't stay here anymore. It's over. This is my house now. My life. And I don't need some useless old fart taking up space, running up my utility bills, and reminding me of everything I've lost. The words didn't seem to register at first. They were just sounds, sharp and ugly, that didn't fit into the reality of the day. Kevin, I don't understand. I stammered, my mind struggling to catch up. This is my home. Emily wanted me here. She made me promise. Emily is dead, he roared. And the sound was so violent it seemed to rattle the plates in the cabinets. What she wanted doesn't matter anymore. This is the real world, Arthur. And in the real world I've got my own life to live. And it sure as hell doesn't include playing nursemaid to a pathetic old man who can't even take care of himself. I gripped the edge of the granite counter to keep from falling, my knuckles turning white. My legs felt like they were made of water. But what I didn't realize in that moment was that his verbal cruelty was only the opening act for a display of malice so calculated, it would haunt me forever. My mouth was as dry as dust. I struggled to form a coherent thought, a single sentence that could penetrate his wall of hate and stop this unfolding nightmare. But where would I go? I finally managed to whisper, my voice a pathetic rasp. All my things are here. Everything I have is in this house. My life for the past 3 years. Kevin let out a short, barking laugh. It was the ugliest, most chilling sound I had ever heard. It held no humor, only scorn. Your things? What things? A box of worn-out clothes and some dusty photo albums? A bunch of worthless junk? Give me a break. He walked past me with a purpose that terrified me and yanked open the front hall closet, pulling out 2 old, scuffed suitcases I recognized as my own. They hit the polished hardwood floor with a deafening thud that seemed to echo the closing of my daughter's casket. Here's how this is going to work, he said, his voice dropping to a low, menacing growl that sent shivers down my spine. You're going to go upstairs and pack your junk. Tonight. And you're going to be gone before I wake up in the morning. I don't care where you go. Find a nursing home. Check into a homeless shelter. Go live under a bridge for all I care. But you are not spending another night under my roof. Do you understand me? The tears, which I had somehow managed to hold back all day for Emily's sake, finally broke free. They streamed down my face, hot and shameful, blurring his cruel face into a distorted mask. Please, Kevin, I begged, the words tearing from my throat. I'm begging you. Don't do this to me. Not today. I just buried my only child. I don't have much money saved up. I'm 58 years old, finding a place to live, a new job. It's not that easy. That is not my problem, he shouted, his face turning a blotchy, furious red. You should have thought of that before you decided to become a professional freeloader for the rest of your life. You think I liked having you here? Listening to you shuffling around the house all day like a ghost? Watching you eat the food I paid for? You've been a leech, Arthur, sucking the life and the money out of us for 3 years. Well, the free ride is officially over. Before I could even find the words to respond, he did something so methodical, so deliberately cruel, that it stole the very breath from my lungs. He walked over to the small antique table by the door where I had left my coat and wallet. He picked up my worn leather wallet, opened it, and with a sneer pulled out the $123 in cash that I had inside. All the physical money I had to my name in the entire world. He folded the bills neatly and tucked them into his own pocket. You won't be needing this as much as I will, he said with a chilling smirk. Then he tossed the empty wallet onto the floor at my feet. The credit cards are still in there, old man, but don't even bother trying to use them. They're on my account, remember? I'm on the phone with the bank canceling every single one of them the second your sorry backside is out that door. The calculated evil of it was paralyzing. This wasn't a spontaneous fit of grief-fueled anger. This was planned. This was pure malice. He then strode over to the front door and ripped it open, letting the cold, damp November air rush into the warm house. Start packing, he ordered, his voice like cracking ice. Now. My legs felt like they were encased in lead as I somehow dragged myself up the stairs to the room that had been my sanctuary. Each step was a monumental effort, a climb up a mountain of grief and shock. My hands shook so badly I could barely unhook the hangers from the closet rod. Every object I touched was a memory, a fresh stab of pain. A framed photo of Emily and me on her college graduation day, her arms slung around my shoulders, both of us beaming. The worn-out paperback of To Kill a Mockingbird she had given me for my last birthday, her inscription on the inside cover filling my blurred vision. The watch, my most prized possession, that she had bought for me with her very first real paycheck. I wrapped it carefully in a pair of socks and buried it deep in my suitcase, a tiny precious piece of her I had to protect. I packed it all, my silent tears soaking into the fabric of my old shirts. When I came back downstairs dragging my 2 suitcases, the sum total of my life, Kevin was waiting by the open door, tapping his foot impatiently on the floorboards. "About time," he muttered, not even looking at me. As I stepped over the threshold, out of the warmth and light and into the cold, indifferent night, I turned back one last time, a desperate, foolish hope flickering in my heart. "Kevin, Emily loved you so much. She would be absolutely heartbroken to see." Slam. The door slammed shut in my face with a finality so brutal it made the porch light flicker and die. I stood there, shivering in the sudden darkness, a 58-year-old widower who had just become homeless on the very day of his only child's funeral. A neighbor's curtain across the street twitched, and then their light went out. No one wanted to be a witness to my profound shame. I eventually made my way to my old '98 Ford Taurus, the one thing he couldn't take from me because the title was still in my name. The engine turned over with a protesting groan. I drove aimlessly for what felt like hours, the familiar streets of my town now looking alien and hostile. I had nowhere to go, no one to call. My phone, I quickly discovered, was dead. He'd already had it disconnected. The isolation was absolute. Finally, I found a 24-hour Walmart parking lot and pulled into a dark, forgotten corner, as far away from the bright entrance as I could get. Using my thin funeral coat as a blanket and a lumpy suitcase as a pillow, I reclined the driver's seat and tried to find some rest. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw Emily's beautiful, smiling face, and then Kevin's twisted sneer. How could the man she loved, the man I had treated like a son, be capable of such profound, unadulterated evil? And a more terrifying question followed in the darkness. How in God's name was I going to survive this? The next 3 weeks were a descent into a private hell, a blur of gnawing hunger, bone-deep cold, and a soul-crushing humiliation I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. I learned quickly and brutally that the world is a very different place when you don't have an address. You become invisible. People don't see you anymore. They look through you, past you, their eyes glazing over as if you're a ghost haunting the edges of their comfortable, well-lit lives. After 2 nights of sleeping in my car, my back screaming in protest, I finally swallowed my pride and found my way to the Oakwood Community Shelter. It was a rundown brick building on the industrial side of town that smelled perpetually of bleach, despair, and unwashed bodies. The cots were lined up in neat, military rows, the thin, stained mattresses doing little to cushion my aging bones from the cold metal frames. But it was a roof and it was warm. At 58 years old, you learn not to be picky about such small mercies. My days fell into a grim, monotonous routine. Wake up at 5:30 a.m. when the harsh overhead fluorescent lights buzzed on. Fold my single, threadbare blanket with military precision. Be out on the street by 7 a.m., no exceptions. I'd spend the day wandering the city, a phantom in broad daylight, looking for odd jobs for cash, sweeping a storefront for $5, helping unload a delivery truck for $10. Anything to scrape together enough money for a hot meal from a cheap diner. Some days I was successful. Other days, dinner was a handful of crackers from a gas station and a bottle of tap water from a public fountain. I tried calling a few old friends from my 30 years at the auto plant, using a payphone at the public library that ate my precious quarters with a greedy clang. The conversations were universally short and excruciatingly painful. Tom, a guy I'd shared a lunch table with for 2 decades, went completely silent as soon as I explained my situation. "Geez, Art, that's just terrible," he stammered, his voice thick with discomfort. When I finally worked up the nerve, my voice trembling with shame, to ask if I could maybe sleep on his couch for just a night or two, just to get my feet under me, the line went dead. He'd hung up on me. No goodbye, no apology. Just a click and then the dial tone. Another former colleague, Janet, was more polite, but her words were just as much of a rejection. "Oh, Arthur, my heart just breaks for you, it really does," she said, her voice dripping with a false sympathy that was almost worse than Tom's silence. "But with the kids in college and the economy, you know how it is. We barely have room for ourselves." I did know. I knew she was scared. People are afraid that bad luck is contagious. It's far easier for them to believe you did something to deserve your fate than to admit how perilously thin the line is between their own security and utter destitution. They didn't want my misfortune tainting their clean, orderly lives. I was a problem they didn't know how to solve, so they chose to ignore me instead. And the most crushing rejection was still to come. The lowest point, the moment that truly broke something inside of me, came when I ran into my old next-door neighbor Bill Henderson outside a downtown hardware store. For 15 years we'd been more than neighbors, we were friends. We'd chatted over the fence while mowing our lawns, we'd borrowed each other's tools, and I'd helped him build the deck in his backyard. Seeing his familiar, friendly face in a sea of strangers felt like a lifeline in a stormy sea. "Bill," I called out, a wave of desperate relief washing over me. He turned, squinting for a moment, and then his expression shifted through a rapid series of emotions. Confusion, then recognition, and then something else. It was pity, but it was mixed with a healthy dose of fear, and it made my stomach clench. "Arthur? My God, man, you look—" He stopped himself, but I could fill in the blank. "Terrible. Worn out. Homeless. It's been a rough time since Emily passed," I said, my voice hoarse as I tried to keep it steady. "Kevin. He kicked me out." Bill Henderson shifted his weight from foot to foot, his eyes darting around nervously as if he was afraid someone might see him talking to me, the local pariah. "Yeah," he said, his gaze fixed on a spot over my shoulder. "Yeah, I heard you weren't doing so well. Kevin stopped by last week. He told me you'd had some kind of episode, that you were getting some special care." My blood ran cold. An episode? Special care? The words were chillingly vague, and my mind raced to understand the implication. "What are you talking about, Bill? What exactly did Kevin tell you?" He looked deeply, profoundly uncomfortable. "Look, Arthur, I can't get involved in this. It's family business, you know." He finally met my eyes, and what I saw there was genuine fear. "But he said you were getting confused. Paranoid. Aggressive, even. He said he was scared for you and for himself, that for your own safety, he had to have you placed in a facility that could handle your condition." He looked me up and down, taking in my dirty clothes and the stubble on my face. I guess that place didn't work out, huh?" He shook his head, muttered a quick, "Take care of yourself, Art." And then he practically fled, hurrying down the street and leaving me standing on the sidewalk, my mind reeling. The poison. Kevin hadn't just thrown me out. He was systematically destroying my reputation, poisoning the well of my past. He was painting me as a crazy, dangerous old man to justify his own monstrous cruelty. And the worst part, the part that made my knees feel weak, was that people were believing him. He wasn't just making me homeless. He was trying to erase me from my own life, and he was succeeding. What would you have done in my shoes? Faced with that level of betrayal from your own family, and then abandoned by your friends, would you have given up? Or would you have found the strength to keep fighting? I'd be genuinely interested to read your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. Because at that moment, standing alone on that cold sidewalk, fighting back felt like an impossible, distant dream. I was just trying to survive until the next sunrise, not knowing that my greedy son-in-law had already planted the seeds of his own spectacular destruction. While I was scraping the bottom of the barrel, fighting for my survival on the cold, indifferent streets, Kevin was facing his own special kind of desperation. He was deep in a financial hole, a secret world of high-stakes online poker and bad sports bets that he had masterfully hidden from Emily throughout her illness. The men he owed money to were not the forgiving type. They were loan sharks who dealt in broken bones, not payment plans, and his final deadline was fast approaching. He needed a large sum of cash, and he needed it yesterday. He had already sold Emily's car and quietly pawned every piece of her jewelry, but it was a drop in the ocean compared to the mountain of debt he was facing. His mind, a twisted knot of greed and primal fear, turned back to me. Not to the man he had discarded, but to the possibility that I, or my late wife, Ellen, might have some hidden assets, some forgotten nest egg that he could plunder. He began to tear the house apart with a feverish intensity. He went through every drawer, every closet, every box that had belonged to me or to Ellen. He was looking for old bank statements, stock certificates, anything of tangible value. He found nothing but sentimental junk, old photographs, letters, my army service medals, all of which he tossed aside with disgust. Frustrated and sweating, he made his way to the dusty, forgotten attic, a place Emily had used to store her childhood treasures. He ripped open old boxes of school projects and moth-eaten stuffed animals, his frustration mounting with every empty find. And then, in the bottom of a heavy cedar-lined chest, he found it. It wasn't a savings bond or a property deed. It was a small shoebox-sized container filled with old letters. Most were trivial, but one particular envelope caught his eye. It was a letter Emily had written to her mother, my Ellen, when she was a freshman in college, working on a mandatory family tree project for a sociology class. He scanned the letter impatiently, but a few sentences jumped out at him from the page. "Mom," Emily had written in her familiar looping script, "I'm having a really hard time with your side of the family tree. I can find plenty about Grandpa's family, the Millers, but when I try to look for your side, it's like Grandma and Grandpa Dalton didn't even exist before they moved to Ohio in the 60s. So strange. Did they change their names or something? And why don't we ever talk about our Dalton relatives?" Kevin froze, the letter trembling in his hand. Dalton. He had never heard that name before in his life. My wife Ellen's maiden name was Miller. He read the lines again, his heart beginning to pound in his chest. Grandpa Dalton. He knew Ellen's father, my father-in-law, had passed away years ago, but his name was John Miller. A cold chill went down his spine. Had Emily simply made a mistake? Or was there something more? Something that had been deliberately hidden? Kevin's mind raced. He rummaged frantically through the box and, tucked into the same envelope, he found Ellen's reply. Her handwriting was neat and precise, a stark contrast to the chaos of his thoughts. "Dearest Emily," she had written, "some family histories are complicated, and ours is one of them. The Daltons you're asking about are from your father's side of the family, not mine. It's a part of his past that he doesn't like to talk about. It brings up very painful memories for him. Please, for his sake, just leave that branch of the family tree empty. Let's respect his privacy on this." Kevin's heart began to pound against his ribs like a trapped bird. My past? My name was Arthur Miller. I had legally taken my wife's name when we married, a fact he knew well. I had told him and everyone else that my own parents had died in an accident when I was just a boy and that I had no connection to their name, or so I had claimed. He stared at the letter, 100 thoughts racing through his avaricious mind. What painful memories! What kind of secret was I hiding? For a man like Kevin, a secret didn't mean pain, it meant leverage. It meant opportunity. It meant money. He didn't know the first thing about this hidden Dalton family, but he was suddenly consumed by a single burning thought. A wealthy family would be a secret worth keeping. He had a new desperate hope. He scraped together the last of his available credit and hired a sleazy private investigator, a man who specialized in digging up the dirt people tried to bury. He gave the investigator my name, Arthur Miller, and the only other piece of information he had, the mysterious surname Dalton. He instructed the man to dig into my past, to find any connection, any living relative, any hidden asset tied to that name. Kevin was fishing for a few $1,000s, a small inheritance, anything to keep the loan sharks at bay for another week. He had no idea that he had just cast his line into the deepest part of the ocean and was about to hook a leviathan. He had no clue how right he was, or that the path he was now on would lead not to his salvation, but to his utter and complete ruin. Meanwhile, my own life had found a quiet, fragile rhythm at Grace Chapel. Betty had become my rock, my only confidant in a world that had turned its back on me. She made sure I had a hot meal every day, and after a particularly cold snap, she had quietly arranged for me to sleep on a cot in the church's warm, dry basement, away from the noise and potential dangers of the main shelter. It was a small kindness that felt like a king's ransom. I never asked for anything, but I insisted on working around the church every day, doing maintenance and repairs. It felt good to work with my hands again, to build and to fix instead of just existing. It gave me a small measure of the dignity that Kevin had tried so hard to strip away. One Tuesday morning, Betty's grandson, A sharp young law student named Leo, who was interning at a big firm downtown, came to the church to have lunch with her. I was in the fellowship hall, carefully restaining some old wooden chairs, when I overheard snippets of their conversation from the next room. "It was the weirdest thing I've seen all month, Grandma," Leo was saying. "This guy comes into the office yesterday, total panic mode, sweating through his suit, hands shaking so bad he could barely sign the visitor log. Said his name was Kevin Thompson." I dropped my sanding block. The clatter it made on the linoleum floor sounded like a gunshot in the quiet hall. I froze, straining to hear more. "He kept asking the senior partners about inheritance law and something called posthumous bloodline verification," Leo continued, oblivious to my presence. "He seemed obsessed with some huge corporation, a local giant called Dalton Manufacturing." Dalton Manufacturing, the name from Emily's letter. My blood ran cold. I felt Betty's eyes on me from the doorway. She saw the look on my face. "Leo," she said, her voice calm and steady, "tell me everything you remember about this man." "He was frantic," Leo said, taking a bite of his sandwich. "He kept saying things like, 'I need to know who the rightful heir is, and there has to be a connection.' Mr. Sterling, my boss, was very professional and told him that the affairs of the Dalton estate were sealed and managed by a private trust, and that the sole heir had been presumed dead or missing for over 50 years. I swear, Grandma, the guy looked like he was going to be sick right there on the Persian carpet. He paid for a full consultation in cash, and then ran out of there like the building was on fire. What could this possibly have to do with me?" Betty put a calming hand on my arm. My own was trembling so violently, I had to set my paintbrush down before I spilled stain all over the floor. "Arthur," she said softly, her voice firm with a conviction that I didn't yet possess, "I think you need to talk to Leo's boss." My mind was a chaotic whirlwind of confusion and fear. What did any of this have to do with me? A missing heir? A sealed estate? It sounded like the plot of a paperback novel, not the story of my life. I was Arthur Miller, a retired auto worker, a widower, a homeless man. The world of corporate giants and billion-dollar trusts was as alien to me as the surface of the moon. But Betty was insistent. She had a gut feeling, a powerful intuition that all these disparate threads, Kevin's cruelty, his desperation for money, the name Dalton, and his frantic visit to a high-powered law firm, were weaving together into a single, unbelievable tapestry. She believed that where there was this much smoke, there had to be a raging fire. Using her grandson's connection, she did something extraordinary. She called Mr. Sterling's office directly, explained the situation in broad strokes, and managed to get me an appointment with the senior partner himself. I was terrified. What could I possibly say to a man like that? I was a homeless man in donated clothes that didn't quite fit. The thought of walking into that temple of wealth and power filled me with a deep sense of shame. But Betty's quiet, unshakable faith in me was stronger than my own fear of the unknown. She even bought me a clean, new shirt from a thrift store for the occasion. 2 days later, I found myself standing in front of an imposing glass and steel skyscraper downtown, its peak disappearing into the low-hanging clouds. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Taking a deep breath, I pushed through the revolving doors and stepped into a world I never knew existed. The offices of Sterling and Finch Law Group were on the 45th floor. The elevator ride up was so smooth and silent it felt like an ascent into heaven, or perhaps another kind of judgment. The reception area was bigger than my old house. A polite young woman led me down a long, silent hallway to a large conference room with a polished mahogany table so long you could land a small plane on it. I sat down, my rough, calloused hands looking completely out of place on its gleaming, perfect surface. I felt like a fraud, a stray dog that had somehow wandered into a palace. A few moments later, a woman in her 40s with sharp, intelligent eyes and a perfectly tailored navy blue suit walked in. "Mr. Miller," she said, extending a hand. Her handshake was firm and confident. "I'm Amanda Sterling. Thank you for coming in. My associate, Leo, and his wonderful grandmother, Betty, have told me a little about your extraordinary situation." I shook her hand numbly. I honestly don't know why I'm here. I truly believe there's been some kind of terrible mistake." She gave me a small, sympathetic smile and sat down opposite me, opening a thick, heavy file folder. "I can assure you, Mr. Miller, there is no mistake. But I can certainly understand your confusion. What I'm about to tell you will likely come as a profound shock. She slid a document across the table. It was a high-quality copy of an old, yellowed birth certificate. I picked it up with trembling hands. The name of the child was Arthur Dalton Jr. The mother's name was my mother's. But the father's name was listed as Arthur Dalton Sr. I don't understand, I whispered, my voice hoarse. My name is Arthur Miller. My father was a mechanic. That, Miss Sterling said gently, her eyes full of a compassion I hadn't seen in years, is the name you've known your whole life. But it's not the name you were given at birth. Arthur, your father was Arthur Dalton Sr., the founder and sole owner of Dalton Manufacturing Corporation. The room started to spin. I grabbed the edge of the heavy table to steady myself as my entire world tilted on its axis. No, I managed to choke out, shaking my head in denial. That's impossible. My mother told me he died in a fiery car accident when I was 2 years old. We had pictures of him. He was a mechanic. He had grease under his fingernails. Your mother lied to you, Arthur, Miss Sterling said, her voice soft but unwavering. For reasons we may never fully understand, when she left your father in 1967, she took you and created an entirely new identity for you both. She changed your surname to her own maiden name, Miller, and she vanished. She told everyone, including you, that your father was dead, perhaps to ensure he would never find you. But he wasn't dead, Arthur. He lived until 1998, and by all accounts, he spent every single day of those 31 years, and a significant portion of his fortune, trying to find you. I couldn't breathe. It felt like a physical weight was pressing down on my chest, sucking the air from my lungs. My entire life, my whole identity, every story I had ever been told about my origins was a lie. The father I thought was a ghost in a faded photograph was a real man, a powerful man, a man who had been searching for me. He had been alive all that time. I had a father and I never knew him. The weight of that revelation was crushing. All the lonely birthdays, the holidays spent with Ellen's family where I always felt like a bit of an outsider. The deep, abiding feeling of being utterly alone in the world. It could have all been different. I stared at the birth certificate at the name Arthur Dalton Jr., and for the first time in 56 years, I felt like I was looking at the ghost of the man I was supposed to be. I sat there in a stunned, silent fog, trying to process the impossible truth. My father, alive all those years, looking for me. My mind simply couldn't grasp the magnitude of it. Miss Sterling gave me a moment, letting the silence hang in the air. Then she slid another set of documents across the table. These were financial statements, thick and filled with columns of numbers that made no sense to me. Arthur, she began, her voice pulling me back from the brink. When your father passed away in 1998, he never gave up hope. He left his entire estate, including 100% ownership of Dalton Manufacturing, in a meticulously structured trust. The sole beneficiary of that trust is you, his only son. The trustees were given one primary instruction: continue the search for you indefinitely. For the past 27 years, that trust has been professionally managed. It has been growing, compounding, waiting for you to be found. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. As of this morning, Dalton Manufacturing is valued at approximately $4.7 billion. The Personal Trust Fund, which has been accumulating interest all these years, holds an additional $800 million. I heard the words, but my brain refused to assemble them into a meaningful reality. Billion, million. They were just words, abstract concepts from television shows about the rich and famous. They couldn't possibly have anything to do with me, the man who had been eating leftover soup in a church basement just yesterday morning. So you're telling me I couldn't even finish the sentence. You're not just rich, Arthur, she said, her expression serious. You are an incredibly wealthy and powerful man. And you have been legally since your 21st birthday. The tragedy is no one could find you to tell you. Then the final brutal piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Kevin, I whispered. He knows. Miss Sterling's expression darkened. Yes, that's the tragic irony in all of this. Your son-in-law Kevin stumbled upon this secret. He found out the truth about who you really are just days after he threw you out onto the street. She pulled one last document from the file. And that, Arthur, is where his greedy plan completely and irrevocably backfired. This is a copy of your father's will. He was a brilliant man. But he was also a man who had been deeply hurt by your mother's betrayal. He included a very specific and legally ironclad clause in his will. He called it the loyalty clause. She pointed to a paragraph highlighted in bright yellow. I leaned forward to read it, my eyes struggling to focus. The legal jargon was dense, but the meaning was crystal clear. Should any member of my heir's family, by blood or by marriage, be found to have knowingly caused my heir physical, emotional, or financial harm, or to have engaged in acts of cruelty, neglect, or public humiliation toward him, that individual shall be permanently and irrevocably barred from receiving any financial benefit, gift, or assistance from my estate, directly or indirectly, for the remainder of their natural life. A slow, cold wave of absolute understanding washed over me. Kevin hadn't just thrown away a father-in-law he thought was worthless. He had, in his single greatest act of cruelty, signed his own financial death warrant. He had personally and permanently guaranteed that he would never see a single penny of the fortune that could have saved him from his self-inflicted ruin. The hours that followed that meeting were a surreal whirlwind, a complete detachment from every reality I had ever known. I walked out of that gleaming skyscraper a different man than the one who had walked in. It wasn't about the money, not really. The numbers were too vast, too abstract to comprehend. It was about the truth. It was about the father I never knew. A man who had never stopped searching for me. A man who had tried to protect me even from beyond the grave. The gaping, painful hole in my past had been filled, and the foundation of my life, which had felt like shifting sand for weeks, was suddenly solid rock. Ms. Sterling and her team were ruthlessly efficient. A whirlwind of quiet, competent action. They handled everything. Within 48 hours, a DNA test had been expedited and the results were conclusive. My identity as Arthur Dalton Jr. was legally and biologically verified. The Board of Trustees of the Dalton estate, a group of elderly, distinguished gentlemen who had been faithfully executing my father's wishes for decades, were notified. They immediately flew in to meet me. They were, to put it mildly, ecstatic. The lost heir, the ghost they had been searching for their entire careers, had finally been found. My first act as a man of means was not to buy a new car or a fancy watch. It was to take care of Betty. I met with Miss Sterling and instructed her to arrange for a 7-figure, anonymous donation to Grace Chapel, enough to keep their doors open and their soup kitchen running for the next 100 years. I also had her set up a personal tax-free trust for Betty herself, enough to ensure she would never have to worry about a single thing for the rest of her life. When Betty heard the news, she cried. Then she hugged me fiercely and told me she was proud of the man I was. Her approval, her simple, honest words, meant more to me than all the billions in the world. The legal team arranged for me to stay in the presidential suite at the city's finest hotel, a palatial space with soft beds, hot showers, and a battalion of staff ready to cater to my every whim. The contrast between my new reality and the cold concrete floor of the church basement was so stark it was almost laughable. I now had assistants, financial advisors, and a discreet security detail. But as I stood on the massive balcony of my suite that first night, looking out over the glittering tapestry of the city lights, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt a quiet, simmering, ice-cold anger. Kevin was out there right now, tearing the city apart looking for me. Not because he was sorry, not because he felt an ounce of remorse, but because he was desperate. He saw me as his lottery ticket, his get-out-of-jail-free card from the violent consequences of his own disastrous life. He had no idea that the ticket had already been voided by his own hand. I picked up the new, encrypted phone my team had provided and called Ms. Sterling. I don't want to go public with this yet, I told her, my voice firm. My reappearance, my new identity. I want you to keep it completely under wraps for now. May I ask why, Arthur? She asked, her voice professional but laced with curiosity. Kevin, I said, my voice cold and hard as steel. He's out there hunting for a homeless man named Arthur Miller. He believes this broken, pathetic man is his only hope. I want to see how far he'll go. I want to understand the full depth of his depravity, the absolute bottom of his desperation, before I confront him. There was a pause on the other end of the line. I understand completely, she said finally. Consider it done. We'll operate in the background. What do you need from us? I need eyes and ears, I said. I want to know every move he makes, every person he talks to, every desperate, panicked call he places. I want him to feel the walls closing in on him from all sides. This wasn't about revenge, not in the simple, hot-blooded way you might think. It was about a different, colder kind of justice. It was about showing a man who believed only in power and money that he had made his fatal mistake when he picked on someone he thought had neither. I was no longer the victim in this story. I was the man in control. And the hunt was about to be reversed. The reports started coming in almost immediately, painting a vivid, pathetic picture of a man spiraling into a frantic, desperate madness. My legal team was discreet but incredibly thorough, using their vast resources to monitor Kevin's activities without him ever knowing. The first reports were almost comical in their sheer, unmitigated audacity. He had contacted Miss Sterling's office no fewer than 6 times in the first 2 days, each call more frantic and unhinged than the last. He's offering us a substantial retainer, what he's calling a finder's fee, just to locate you, Miss Sterling told me over the phone one afternoon, a note of professional disbelief in her voice. He's spinning the most fantastic tale. He claims it was all a terrible misunderstanding. He's telling my junior partners that you were the one who wanted to leave, that you were suffering from depression after Emily's death and felt like a burden. He claims he was only respecting your wishes for independence. He's now positioning himself as the deeply worried son-in-law, terrified that his beloved, elderly father-in-law is in grave danger on the mean streets of the city. I had to laugh, a bitter, humorless sound that echoed in the luxurious hotel suite. My beloved, elderly father-in-law? Is that what he's calling the useless old fart he threw out with the trash? Oh, it gets better, Arthur, she continued, her voice tinged with disgust. He's even suggested that once you're found, you'll need professional care and supervision to manage your affairs, given your, and I quote, fragile emotional and mental state. He's not so subtly trying to lay the groundwork to have you declared mentally incompetent so that he can gain control of the estate as your legal guardian. The sheer, calculated evil of his plan was breathtaking. He wasn't just looking for a handout. He was planning a hostile takeover of my life. He wanted to steal my identity, my freedom, and my fortune all at once, and he was trying to use the very law firm I had hired to do it. The reports from the street were just as revealing. Betty's informal network of volunteers from the soup kitchen and other shelters had become my unofficial intelligence agency. They told me that Kevin had been making the rounds, visiting every shelter and food pantry in a 20-mile radius. He was showing my old faded driver's license photo to anyone who would listen, offering $50, then $100, then $200 in cash for any information on my whereabouts. He was no longer the well-dressed, confident man from the funeral. The volunteers described him as disheveled, wild-eyed, and reeking of cheap whiskey and desperation. One of Betty's friends, a tough older woman who ran a shelter on the west side, told us that Kevin had become belligerent and threatening when she told him she hadn't seen me. He had accused her of hiding me, of being negligent with the people under her care. He had actually shouted that if anything happened to me, if I froze to death on the street, it would be her fault. He was trying to bully and intimidate the very people who had shown me more kindness and compassion in 3 weeks than he had shown me in 3 years. He was rewriting history, trying to paint himself as the hero in a story where he was unequivocally the monster. Every lie he told, every desperate act he committed, only served to tighten the legal and moral noose around his own neck. He was so utterly focused on the prize that he couldn't see the jaws of the trap closing around him, and I was the one holding the rope. The time for passive observation was over. I needed to see his desperation for myself, to witness the state of the man who had so casually and completely destroyed my world. I wanted to look into the eyes of the monster he had become. That evening, I did something my new, very serious security detail strongly advised against. I put on some of my old clothes from my time at the shelter, a worn-out flannel shirt, faded jeans, and a baseball cap pulled down low over my face. I took a taxi to the gritty neighborhood surrounding the Oakwood shelter and found a dark, recessed bus stop across the street, a perfect, shadowy vantage point. I didn't have to wait long. Just as the nightly dinner line was forming outside the shelter, a familiar late-model sedan screeched to a halt at the curb. Kevin practically fell out of the car. The man I saw was a complete stranger. His expensive suit was wrinkled and stained. His hair was a greasy, uncombed mess, and he had a dark, patchy beard that looked like it hadn't seen a razor in over a week. His movements were jerky and frantic, his eyes darting back and forth like a cornered, rabid animal. I watched, my heart a cold, heavy stone in my chest, as he systematically worked his way down the dinner line, shoving my picture in the faces of the tired, hungry people waiting for a meal. "Have you seen this man? Arthur Miller. Old guy about my height. I'm his son-in-law. I'm desperately worried about him." Most people just shook their heads, instinctively recoiling from his frantic, aggressive energy. A few took the money he was offering and pointed in vague, unhelpful directions, just to get him to move on. He was a shark in a sea of minnows, and they could all smell the blood and desperation in the water. His desperation quickly escalated into aggression. He grabbed one young, skinny man by the arm, refusing to let go when the man tried to pull away. "I know you've seen him. Just tell me where he is," he yelled, his voice cracking with strain. A large, burly shelter employee had to come out and physically intervene, threatening to call the police before Kevin finally backed off, muttering a stream of curses under his breath. He stalked back to his car, utterly defeated. And then I saw the moment that revealed everything. He pulled out his cell phone and made a call. Even from across the street in the growing dusk, his voice carried on the evening air, sharp with pure, undiluted terror. "I'm trying," he screamed into the phone. "You don't think I'm trying? I've been to every damn shelter and soup kitchen in this godforsaken city." There was a long, tense pause and he listened, his whole body rigid with fear. No, I know the deadline is Friday. I know what happens if I don't have it. Just give me 2 more days. I'm so close I can feel it. I'll get you your money, I swear to God." He ended the call and for a long moment, he just stood there, leaning his forehead against the cold roof of his car as if he couldn't support the weight of his own head. Then with a guttural roar of pure rage and despair, he slammed his fist down on the hood of the car, again and again and again, the ugly percussive sound echoing in the quiet street. Watching him, I didn't feel the satisfaction I expected. I didn't feel pity either. I felt a profound, chilling sense of finality. This was the real Kevin. Not the charming husband or the grieving son-in-law. This was a desperate gambler at the end of his rope. A man who would lie, cheat, and steal to save his own skin. He wasn't looking for me out of love or remorse. He was looking for an ATM. He had made his choices, built his own prison of greed and deceit. And I knew with absolute certainty that it was time for me to lock the door and throw away the key. The next time we met, it would not be on a dark street corner. It would be on my terms. And there would be a reckoning. Thank you all for sticking with me through this. It's hard to talk about this part of the story, to revisit that level of darkness. If you're still here with me, listening to my journey, please just type the number 1 in the comments. It really helps me to know you're still there, that I'm not just talking into the void. Your support means more than you know. Knowing that you're listening, it gave me the strength for what I knew I had to do next. The 6 months that followed were a testament to the fact that it's never too late to start over, to build a new life from the rubble of the old one. Leaving that conference room felt like closing the final chapter of a dark and painful book I never wanted to read again. I never saw or heard from Kevin again. Ms. Sterling and her efficient team handled the legal fallout. As predicted, he was forced to declare bankruptcy. The house, the home that held so many of my precious memories of Emily, was sold at auction to pay off a fraction of his astronomical debts. I heard through the grapevine that he'd left town in the middle of the night, presumably running from the people he owed money to. His fate was his own to bear. I felt no satisfaction in his downfall, only a profound sense of release, as if a great weight had been lifted from my soul. My focus shifted entirely from the painful past to the possibilities of the future. I moved out of the city, buying a beautiful, quiet home on the shores of Lake Erie. The rhythmic sound of the waves crashing on the shore became my therapy, a constant, calming presence. But I knew I couldn't just sit on a porch and watch the world go by. My father had built an empire, and I had been given the extraordinary chance to decide its legacy. I wasn't a corporate raider or a slick CEO. I was a man who had worked with his hands his whole life. A man who knew intimately what it felt like to be invisible, cold, and hungry. I took control of Dalton Manufacturing not with an iron fist, but with a new compassionate purpose. My first major act as chairman of the board was to establish the Emily Dalton Foundation, a nonprofit organization with a single clear mission: to ensure that no elderly person in the state of Ohio would ever have to choose between food and medicine, or spend a winter night on the streets. We didn't just write checks to existing shelters, we built new ones from the ground up. We created facilities that were clean, safe, and above all respectful. These were places that offered not just a warm bed, but also job training, free medical care, and professional counseling. I remembered the pervasive smell of bleach and despair at Oakwood, and I vowed that our facilities would be beacons of dignity and hope. My first hire for the foundation was, of course, Betty. I offered her the position of executive director, with a salary that made her gasp and her eyes water. She tried to refuse, saying it was far too much, but I insisted. "You were the only one who saw me when I was invisible, Betty," I told her, my voice thick with emotion. "There's no one on this earth I trust more to make sure that we see everyone else." One of the most healing moments for me came a few months later. I drove back to my old neighborhood and knocked on Bill Henderson's door. He opened it and his jaw dropped. I was no longer the haggard, haunted ghost he had turned away from at the hardware store. I calmly and quietly explained everything to him. Kevin's lies, the truth about my family, everything. He was mortified, his face turning red with shame as he apologized over and over. "It's okay, Bill," I said, shaking his hand. "Fear makes people do strange things. The important thing is what we do when we learn the truth." We stood on his porch and talked for over an hour, just like we used to in the old days. A small but important piece of my old life had been restored, made whole again. I was building a new life, not on the ashes of the old one, but with the hard-won lessons it had taught me. Today my life is full. It's not filled with fancy parties or extravagant toys, but with a quiet, profound purpose. I spend my days working with the foundation, meeting the people we're helping, hearing their stories. I see a flicker of my own past in their eyes, the fear, the resilience, the fragile hope, and I make sure they know that they are seen, that they matter. I often drive down to the lake in the evenings, watching the sunset paint the water in brilliant shades of orange and purple. In those quiet, reflective moments I think about Emily. I miss her with a deep, persistent ache that will never fully go away. But the sadness is no longer overwhelming. It's softer now, mingled with a sense of peace. I like to think she would be proud of what we're building in her name. I learned a hard, invaluable lesson in the darkest days of my life. The man who threw me away because he thought I was worthless taught me everything I will ever need to know about value. He saw worth in dollar signs, in assets, in what he could take from others. He was so blinded by his desperate search for money that he couldn't see the real treasure right in front of him: family, loyalty, and basic human decency. In the end, his boundless greed left him with absolutely nothing. I, on the other hand, was stripped of everything I thought defined me: my home, my family, my very name. And in that terrifying emptiness, I found my true self. I discovered a strength I never knew I possessed. I found kindness in strangers and a purpose that reached far beyond my own small life. My real inheritance wasn't the billions of dollars my father left me. It was the resilience he passed down through his genes, the drive to build something lasting, and the incredible blessed chance to turn my own pain into someone else's comfort. True worth isn't about what's in your bank account or the name on your birth certificate. It's about character. It's about how you treat people, especially when you think no one is watching, especially when you think they have nothing to offer you. The man who thought I was worthless taught me how truly priceless I am. He showed me that true poverty isn't having no money. It's having no compassion. I am finally home. Not in a house made of bricks and mortar, but within myself. Thank you so much for listening to my story today. It means the world to me that you've shared this journey with me. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like so more people can find it. And I have one last question for you all. Have you ever had an experience, big or small, that taught you a powerful lesson about your own self-worth or the true nature of another person? I would be honored if you would share your story in the comments below. Your story matters, and we can all learn from each other. Thank you again and take care.